Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all the attendees. This is a joint seminar between the Keller Center, the Chadha Center for Global India, and the Sustainable Healthy Cities Network at Princeton University. I want to welcome all the speakers as well as all the attendees. Our topic today is exploring Tiger Challenge projects on sustainable healthy cities in the US and India. Just as background, I want to introduce myself, very quickly introduce our speakers, and then hand off to the Keller Center for a brief introduction of Tiger Challenges. So our goal here today is to explore how we can get students at all levels, undergraduates, graduates, PhD students, postdocs, and faculty engaged in community engaged research experiences related to sustainable cities, design thinking, and entrepreneurship. And we anticipate these to be highly interdisciplinary. I want to welcome our panel speakers. So first and foremost, I want to welcome Angie Fife, who's the executive director of ICLEI USA. ICLEI USA is a network of more than 500 cities in the US, and they work on all topics related to sustainability. A related organization to ICLEI, ICLEI stands for Local Governments for Sustainability, is ICLEI South Asia, which is based in New Delhi, India. And I want to welcome Ashish Rao Ghorpade, who's the Deputy Director of ICLEI South Asia and brings a lot of experience working on the ground with cities. And our third speaker here is Dr. Dana Boyer, who's a research manager and the lead scientist on urban food systems at the Sustainable Healthy Cities Network at Princeton University. And I will introduce the panel and myself. I'm Anu Ramaswamy. I'm the director of the Chadha Center for Global India. I'm a professor of civil and environmental engineering and at the High Meadows Environmental Institute at Princeton University. So before we launch into the whole slides, if you go to the next slide, we'd like to learn more from the Keller Center about what the Tiger Challenge is. And then we can launch into our panel discussion. So I want to hand off to Jessica, who will give us an overview of the Keller Center and an overview of what a Tiger Challenge is, so that we can have time in our panel discussion to think about how can we bring our partners together and engage Princeton students in a challenge. So Jessica, over to you.
Hi, so as Anu mentioned, I'm Jessica Leung, and I'm the program manager who develops the curriculum and also teaches the Tiger Challenge, Princeton's only design thinking program that is a part of the Keller Center, which is our hub for innovative education, entrepreneurship, design thinking, and societal impact. So before we get into today's panel to explore the potential of applying design thinking in tackling sustainable cities in the US and India, I'm going to give you an overview of what the Tiger Challenge program does. In my program, undergraduate and graduate students from all sorts of backgrounds, majors, and disciplines begin in the summer every year. They come into the program as a cohort and are placed into different teams to tackle different complex societal issues. We also call them wicked problems. The students are partnered with community groups and organizations, nonprofits, and advised by faculty members to find solutions to these problems. Just some numbers here. I'm not going to go through all the bullets, but I wanted to highlight two things. First, the program started in June 2016, and to date, we have had 10 cohorts with 185 students currently enrolled or have completed the program. Second, our 38 projects to date have spanned and rather equally distributed across the categories of equity and social justice, health and health tech, education, environmental, civic engagement, and institutional innovation. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about the program itself, which is specially designed to guide students through solving complex societal issues using what we call the human-centered, society-centered approach. Design thinking is a very particular and intentional process. First, there's contextualization, where the students define intent, conduct ethnographic research and empathy interviews, synthesize the research, and frame and contextualize the problem. Next is conceptualization, where the students explore concepts, synthesize the concepts generated, prototype the favorite ideas, test and prototypes with users, and incorporate these changes. They iterate the prototype and test until a workable design is reached. Then lastly, we have implementation, where students implement first with a pilot, and then they scale it. So despite the way I explained it, it is actually more of a cyclical process than a linear one. So with this human-centered approach, the goal is to build actionable, innovative solutions to make real societal impact, while establishing strong partnerships between students and local communities and partners. So students in the Tiger Challenge not only learn about design thinking theories, skills, methodologies, all of which they also get to apply in real time through working with their teams on specific projects, and thereby also learning the design thinking mindsets. By working in a team with real people, as well as with the project's stakeholders, such as faculty advisors, community partners, and people for whom they're designing, it is important that as a program, we cultivate together mindsets like radical collaboration, a bias towards action, creativity and innovation, embracing failure, and most importantly, and at the core, empathy. So all technicalities aside, what I personally love most about the program, and I guess the most proud of, is that it cultivates the human element that is not only important in innovation and entrepreneurship, but super beneficial to the students' personal growth, as in how to accept that we're human, that we're different, and that we need other people to survive in this world. And that human-centered design isn't just something to apply to a project in a class or a program, but something that we should live and breathe. So this is it. I hope it sets the context for the discussion that is going to follow. And if anyone has any questions specifically regarding the Tiger Challenge program, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact info is right above the tiger's head. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. That was a great introduction. And I'm sorry that my dog has chosen to bark at this moment. So I hope if you hear him, hear her, I apologize on her behalf. So I just shut the door, and I want to move to the second part of our presentation, which is giving us a broad introduction about the Sustainable Urban Systems Lab at Princeton University. I'm the lead PI and director of the lab, as well as NSF's Sustainable Healthy Cities Network. We also have another grant on innovations at the Food, Energy, Water Nexus. As I mentioned, I'm a professor at Civil and Environmental Engineering and the High Meadows Environmental Institute, and I direct the Chadha Center. So I want to bring these different roles and these different entities in the university together to think about a Tiger Challenge. So the next slide shows very quickly the Chadha Center for Global India is a relatively new center. I started as the inaugural director of the center in the fall semester of 2019. And of course, as we all know, we had the pandemic starting in March. And so we're trying to brainstorm online how we can have broad engagement with Princeton's undergraduate students on a variety of projects in India. The next slide shows my own area of interest, which is urban sustainability. And like I said, I have the Sustainable Urban Infrastructure Systems Lab at Princeton, which is very closely linked to the Sustainable Healthy Cities Network, which is supported by the National Science Foundation, and actually works on these 7 provisioning systems. So if you're interested in a project on food, we have that. On buildings, we have that. Energy, green infrastructure, mobility, water, and waste, and their interactions. The next slide shows that we are looking at multiple outcomes. So we work with humans at multiple levels. We work with them at the community scale, but we also work with cities who in turn work with their communities. And we're looking at how to make large scale policy change for people on the ground, improving health, well-being, environment, social justice and equity, as well as livability. And these are really complicated. So how do you work out the trade-offs and co-benefits? And the next slide is we look at different pathways of change. Some of it is technology and design oriented. Some of it is spatial reconfiguration within cities. Some of it may be business practices and finance, policy and governance, behavior change, and integration. And what you'll find, and you'll hear from both Angie Fife and Ashish Rao Ghodpade, is city policymakers have to look at all of them together. So it isn't that you can only do technology without worrying about how it will be governed. You really have to look at them together. And the next slide is just saying that my own lab, over 15 years of co-producing research. So we engage in co-production. It's been quite an honor for me to work with more than 20 cities on their climate action plans. You'll hear from Dana Boyer, we're now doing food action planning. It's resulted not only in plans, but also scientific research papers, student thesis projects. So if a Tiger Challenge isn't the right fit, talk to us about doing a thesis or a summer internship. It's also brought me to Angie and Ashish. We've created networks between universities and ICLEI and cities, which has really been a pleasure to work with both of them and multiple cities for scaling up our impact. Our students have actually initiated 2 startup companies. And to me, the biggest joy is to have amazing students who have so much passion, sort of fire in the belly to make change happen, that to have you in my classes and to have us work as a group is just absolutely a pleasure. It's why I love being in a university setting. So very quickly, I wanted to say here are several grants. If you can just quickly click through them. We have the Sustainable Healthy Cities Network. Just keep clicking through them. We have a food systems. We have a Smart and Connected Cities project where we're looking at fine scale green infrastructure modeling. We have Urban Data Project that we're launching. And finally, we have a project with the Metropolitan Council at the Twin Cities to develop net zero cities. How can we get to net zero carbon emissions through a variety of technologies and policies? So the next few slides are just really quick to say that the way we work in our network and in my lab is to really work with communities through their city representatives to develop various plans. We also had the real privilege of working with Denver back in 2005 and then expanding that work by working with ICLEI USA. So we produced the journal documents that you see on the left side, and we also were able to actually make this into protocols that more than 500 cities are now using. So your impact can be scaled up beyond one city to multiple cities, and that's the power of the networks we're going to hear both from Angie and from Ashish. And the next slide shows that we were deeply involved in developing the City of Denver's Climate Action Plan. In fact, now Senator Hickenlooper from Colorado, who was formerly the governor of Colorado, was previously the mayor of Denver. And I think he would say that Anu and my band of merry engineers were engaged really deeply with the city in making our climate action plan. So the students learned a lot of skills, and we also produced something actionable, and we worked with Denver every 2 years to monitor progress in the plan. And so multiple students have had theses come out of this work. So our topic today is how can we think about mapping this at Princeton, both to classes as well as projects that students might engage with. And one avenue could be the Tiger Challenge. So with that, I'll stop and hand off to Angie Fife about how to engage students in plan making with local governments. We'll then switch to Dana Boyer, who can talk about implementing those plan priorities. How do you actually implement them? And then we'll take a tour to India to look at interesting projects that might be interesting for us at Princeton to develop Tiger Challenges or other types of projects. So with that, Angie, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I myself have a strong interest in human-centered design. If you take a look at my bio on the ICLEI USA website, you'll see reference to that. So Jessica, I was really excited to hear you speak about that. So good morning, good afternoon to all of you, and good evening to my colleague Ashish, who's calling in so late from India. It's really a pleasure to be on this panel with him and with the rest of you. ICLEI is a nonprofit organization. We've been around for about 30 years now, and we were established for the purpose of bringing local climate action into the international climate and biodiversity dialogues. ICLEI has a very unique role in that we are the local government and municipal authorities lead for the UNFCCC work, as well as for the Convention on Biological Diversity. So we have this opportunity to work with communities at the ground level, as well as connect their work to the international level. I wanted to provide a few examples of the ways in which we work with cities in the United States, and then speak specifically to some projects we have been doing that involve students. We work through 5 different pathways. Many of them overlap with a news description of the sustainable urban environment. We work on low emissions development, developing resilient climate adaptive communities, working through nature-based solutions, circularity, so circular economy, tightening those loops within our communities, and then of course, bringing in equity and people into our work. At ICLEI USA, we work primarily with the sustainability directors or individuals who are responsible for climate change within a local government. These individuals are often located within the mayor's office, sometimes county commissioner's office, public works department, or a standalone sustainability and climate division, which is becoming certainly more common. Anu mentioned the protocols, the greenhouse gas protocols. This is probably something that ICLEI USA is most well known for. We took the protocols developed with the city of Denver and a news team, and then manifest those protocols into a software application called ClearPath. ClearPath is an emissions management software that cities, counties, and regional governments across the United States use to develop a greenhouse gas inventory and then model climate mitigation strategies and develop their emissions reduction plans. We currently have over 1,000 communities that have signed up to use ClearPath, so it's quite a well-known product. And we've entered into a strategic partnership this year with Google. Google has, as you can imagine, a lot of data related to activity happening within a community. So Google is providing us with data for 3,000 US cities that will help us to get a better idea of how transportation and building energy use in cities contributes to their carbon footprint. Other work that we've done at the city level this year, we created a voluntary local review of the Sustainable Development Goals for the city of Orlando, Florida. And we'll be expanding that work in the coming year by providing this voluntary local review to additional cities. We worked with Phillipstown, New York, which is a small community, to develop a consumption-based emissions inventory this year. This required doing some surveys of the residents to understand their food choices, dietary choices, where they were purchasing services and goods, and how they were disposing of those items. We also worked with the town of New Paltz, New York, to develop a vulnerability assessment, we were able to take data that's available from NOAA data sets and downscale that to the town of New Paltz and help the city understand what sort of climate adaptation strategies they would need to put into place looking out to 2050 and 2100. And finally, I'd like to talk about the cohort of cities that we worked with in Indiana. So this is an example of how we at ICLEI USA have worked with students. Last year, we put together a partnership with the Indiana University and specifically with their Environmental Resilience Institute. Indiana, as many of you in the US know, is a rather red state, shall we say, a very conservative state, not a lot of communities having done greenhouse gas inventories or put climate action plans into place. So the Resilience Center recognizes that cities approach this through many avenues. And one avenue is approaching cities under the frame of resilience and the need for climate adaptation, regardless of whether you are active in the climate change space, you recognize that things are changing, conditions are changing on the ground, flooding, heat waves, etc. And so approaching a number of cities in Indiana with the idea that resilience building begins with reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we partnered with the university and their students to work with 14 local governments in Indiana to create a greenhouse gas inventory in the ClearPath tool using the protocols Anu referenced. And we will now be working with those cities to develop their climate action plans to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. So a great opportunity for the students at Indiana University to get some hands-on experience with both the data and the science that goes into creating a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, but then also the human side of understanding what a local government policymaker is thinking about as they are preparing to address the results of that emissions inventory. So we look forward to having an opportunity to hopefully working with some Princeton students. We would really love to explore that a bit more with you. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Angie. And thank you for highlighting how the human-centered design comes in. And I think for all of our students, it's been eye-opening. You know, how do you manage really complex issues with a city manager or a city sustainability officer? And so to give you a bit more of that perspective, I want to invite Dana Boyer. So Dr. Boyer is lead food systems scientist at the Sustainable Healthy Cities Network and the SUS Lab, and she'll talk about a project with the city of Minneapolis.
As Anu mentioned, I've been working with the city of Minneapolis for about 2 years now. So my background is I'm an engineer and working with Anu's lab. I've moved more into the interdisciplinary urban system space, and particularly food is, I think, a really interesting infrastructure to think about, because to a greater degree than one thinks of the energy or water system, there's a lot of human interaction. So when we're talking about design thinking and human and empathy, the food system is really a really valuable infrastructure to look at. So my work began about 2 years ago with the city of Minneapolis as a PhD student at the time, and I joined the Food Policy Council just as a community member representative to begin to develop this relationship with our group. And I'll just give you a little background on the plan. So their overarching goal is to develop a roadmap towards a more equitable, climate resilient, and sustainable local food system and local food economy. So the goal of the Minneapolis Food Action Plan, or MFAP, is to develop a 2030 roadmap for Minneapolis food systems actions, building on previous efforts and plans, aligning with the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. So that's an international organizing group that tries to get cities to take action in their food system, and incorporating data and community input. So one interesting thing about this plan is it's actually an amendment to the Climate Action Plan in the Minneapolis, or it will be in the city of Minneapolis. Food is obviously a really important sector when we're thinking about emissions. And so it was positioned as, it started in the sustainability department as an amendment. To give you a little bit of a history on how we started working with the city of Minneapolis in this way, about January, approximately 2019, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the city of Minneapolis between our research group and the city, just really outlining what this partnership would be, what the deliverables would be, just to get everyone on the same page. And this was after I had been on the Food Policy Council for about a year having discussions, so they were aware of what we did in our lab. Then we had 6 public meetings held from April 2019 to March 2020. And so the picture on the right is actually at this kickoff meeting. The mayor of Minneapolis spoke, a number of community members spoke, just to gather excitement about this process. And so during the 6 public meetings, we had 1 food system topic per meeting. So for instance, one was sustainable and healthy diets, another would be food waste, another would be urban ag. And in this, we gathered community input on suggested strategies to address both the food system that is community-wide, as well as justice and equity. And this was really to get input in terms of what the community felt was needed in their food system across the multiple outcomes that we were considering. So environment, economy, equity. So overall, 486 actions were proposed by community members and stakeholders for consideration in the plan. And that was across this approximately year period of giving community members opportunity for input. And so this slide is just to illustrate that we took all these actions and we synthesized it down into, effectively, you'll see on the right, these 6 pathways of really what showed up repeatedly throughout the feedback. And so I'll just show you on the left here are the different components of the food system we are looking at. So we started with food justice and equity. We talked about diets and demand. So what are people eating? Then we went to agricultural food production, processing, wholesale, retail, and distribution, wasted food, and food scraps. And so synthesizing these 486 individual actions, we narrowed it on these pathways. And I'll just go to the next slide because they're a bit bigger so we can look at them. So one was to strategically increase urban agriculture. The second was to connect local producers and farmers with local markets. The third was increase consumption of healthy plant-based diet. And the fourth, decrease wasted food and improve management of food scraps. The fifth is create food system jobs and small business opportunities. And then the last is continue studying our food system to create innovative solutions to advance plan outcomes. So this was what the community really wanted to focus on. But then the next question, which would be really well primed, I think, for a Tiger Challenge, is creating an implementation strategy for the community developed pathways. So for instance, if you want to increase consumption of a healthy plant-based diet, how do we actually do that, right? What sort of strategies would gain ground with people? Or if you want to decrease wasted food, again, how would we get people to engage? Whether that might be a policy solution, that might be a behavior change. But this again is where really digging in and exploring, what's the context of the problem, what would motivate people would be the key next steps in terms of how will we actually make progress towards achieving these pathways towards the outcomes. So that's the last slide. So I'll hand it back to Anu.
Yes, thank you, Dana. And that puts us perfectly to invite Ashish. And Ashish Rao Ghorpade is, as I mentioned, he's joining us. It's 11:30 or so in India. So it's really late, and I want to appreciate him joining us at these very late hours in India. He's also working with us at the Chadha Center to help us sort of like a in-country research manager in India. Of course, then the pandemic struck. And so we're trying to figure out how could we work with Ashish to think about projects in India. And I wanted to invite him to share some ideas of actionable projects in India, sort of similar to what you've heard from Minneapolis and what you've heard from Angie, but from a very India, what is important in India for us to engage and how do we engage in them?
Right. Thank you, Professor. Thank you for having me join this panel. This is very interesting for me. So first off, I think the introduction tells you about me. I represent ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, the South Asia office, which is based in Delhi. We service our member cities in the region in South Asia, but this includes around 60 plus cities who are members in India. There are many others who work with us who are not members, but work with us because they agree with the way that we work and are committed to sustainability in their actions and projects. Our work mostly is focused around thematic areas of waste, water, transport, planning, energy efficiency, and such. But this is all coming together in the form of the 5 pathways that I think speaker before me from ICLEI, Angie, also mentioned. And so in a way, most of our work in India as well, through the various projects, connects with these pathways directly or indirectly. And of the 5 pathways, we did talk about people-centered development as an important pathway as well. Now, talking about examples of projects that we have implemented in India, definitely as Angie mentioned before me, we are focused around climate action by cities. And so a lot of our work is centered around developing climate action plans and helping cities to implement actions in line with those plans. But I want to talk specifically about actions that we are working on with cities. And I would give examples of maybe 3 typology of projects. And to begin with, I could talk about our projects which are focused around supporting cities with electric vehicle deployment. And there are a number of initiatives of this kind that we work with in Indian cities. But and this includes public transport, so buses, but this also includes like last mile access, so 3-wheelers and such, and electrification of those in the cities. An example could be a city like Rajkot. I don't take many names because I'm not sure that many of the participants will be aware of the city names. But for example, in the city of Rajkot, we helped the city think through what electrification would mean for them. And that would mean working with the city government through a very engaging and participatory process in understanding exactly what the vehicular mix in the city is, how the public transport system currently works, and then looking at the possibility of electrification, current technologies, whether it is possible. And when we have these kinds of discussions, this means engaging in discussions with the city officials, but also with various stakeholders in the city who might have a say and who might have ideas to add to how we would want to take the project further. And of course, this process of deployment and actual implementation is a long run process wherein we first think about the possibilities. I think all of the speakers talked about developing options and thinking about what is possible, and then highlighting and selecting the most feasible option and see how that becomes a reality, how that can be implemented on ground. Another project that I can talk about is a project called Promise, which mainly focuses on last mile access of urban services to the citizens in a city. And I would highlight the city of Jabalpur, where we worked with the city on the issue of sewerage management. And this project was very interesting for us because most of our work focused around towards, by the time we understood the issue really, was mapping how the various initiatives by the city to improve sewerage were to come together. And so a lot of documentation of that, putting it up on one platform, and then having discussions with the city officials on how this can be communicated to the citizens. The city had not been able to implement sewerage services across, I think, more than a decade through a number of projects that were running. But the gap was the communication, which was not possible because all of these various projects were being implemented by various subdivisions within the engineering department in the city. And it was not coming together as a information palette that could be shared with citizens, telling them how and what the city is planning and what would be the impacts of this change and how people need to react to that. So this was a very interesting experience that we had. And based on this kind of a mapping, we went ahead supporting the city on the implementation of the first, I think, set of wards. This was, I think, ward number 31 that we worked in detail with community engagement on trying to see what may be the individual small issues that citizens might have, which need to be addressed and communicated to the city and the councillors and the officials to see that actions happen as would be acceptable to majority of the citizen group. Another project that I would want to talk about, and this is different from the earlier two, which were more infrastructure centric, but it is linked to urban infrastructure, is a project called Urban 95. And this is a very interesting project because it looks at how a city can be seen from the eyes of very young children. So children the age of 0 to 5 years of age, how we can make sure that the infrastructure, the public spaces, the commute areas could be developed so that they are conducive to their growth and their perspective, with the understanding that this young age is the age when the brain of a young child develops the fastest, and so what he or she absorbs during this age is something that makes a lot of difference to their life in future. And of course, most important is that this is a group that might be the most vulnerable group in a city. So if we are addressing the needs of a citizen of that group, we are in a way making our city for all by developing it in this manner. So a lot of documentation, a lot of discussion goes on in developing projects like this. And most of our work, I mean, this is just a sample of 3 example projects that we might talk about right now, are executed in partnership with the city officials, city governments. They come on board and we work with them by housing our representatives, our team members within the municipal council. And throughout the process of the change that we are wanting to see in the city, how we bring about that change, we try to engage with the community and see how these projects get implemented on ground. I think most cases, a nonprofit like ours that's working across cities, we have a lot of students from India, Indian colleges coming and partnering with us, be it through student projects, be it through internships, wherein they come with us, look at site-specific issue documentation, look at solution analysis and possibilities, look at solutioning, pilot testing, look at community engagement and feedback that informs decision-making at the city, and such similar projects. We have also had the opportunity of having students previously from Professor Anu's institutes join us and work with us on developing solutions and also forming part of their own research in the ground conditions in India. And those have been very interesting experiences. Most cases, I think, our discussions center around how would the city benefit from the engagement of a student, and how would the research and the problem resolution that the student focuses on add to what the city is already doing for making itself better for the citizens. So I think I will focus, I would not have more to talk about right now on this, but I'd be happy to take questions, and I'd be happy to add more to the discussion from, what kind of responses or queries come from participants. Thank you.
That's wonderful. So thank you, Ashish, and actually thank you to all of the panelists for giving us this very rich background on what types of work we've already done and what might be avenues going forward. So I've opened this up to Q&A, and I see a few questions coming in, and maybe I can read them out. One of them is, how do you deal with the political interface in your operational work? If the cities are not unequal structurally, how do you deal with it? So she says she specializes, this is a question from Priya. She specializes in education in the SDG agenda. And so basically she's saying, how do you address inequality and the politics of change? I guess this is for Angie and Ashish. And if you can even compare and contrast US and India, even I think it'll come out in your comments, but that would be fascinating. And I encourage the audience to please put in other questions. We have a good 12 minutes to go. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the question. I think that there are opportunities in the US to approach our work hopefully a little bit more creatively than a traditional approach. You know, culturally in the United States, we're so focused on the return on investment, right? It has to make dollars and cents. Whereas other parts of the world, it's focused on the needs of people or nature. And so we try to bring those lenses into the work that we do. But if we have a city that is particularly hesitant in terms of moving forward on climate change, we'll almost always approach initially through the lens of improving local government operations. Improving the efficiency of the fleet, the municipal buildings, reducing waste through sustainable procurement. And this can be a door opener to a broader community-wide sustainability or climate lens, because we can attach it first to how do we help the community save money by being more efficient. So that would be one approach from the US.
Thanks, Angie.
Sure, thank you, Angie. I think to add to this, it of course depends from city to city and the way that we are engaging on a project. I can talk about the Promise project, wherein we were trying to look at access for all communities, and when we are engaging to services, and when we are engaging at the city level, it takes time to be able to understand the local politics and the local focus of how the services are being provided. In India, and I'm not sure if it's true around the world, when infrastructure development is usually thought of, we think of the majority and we design for the majority. That's because that's the simpler way, I think, to think of projects. And a lot of times, a very large percentage, when you try and club them into groups and see how many of them are left out of this majority, in reality, are not then part of the so-called majority thinking. And to bring them together and become beneficiaries of investments that are planned at the city level, we have found through our work that it may not require equal amount of effort as that majority focused infrastructure investment originally was thought of. And it might mean a lot of communication, interaction, and understanding on both sides in terms of what the city government is thinking and what they think is possible from their efforts, and what the citizens are finding as are their limitations, and they need to be brought to the table for a discussion as well. And we try and do this through a lot of engaging interactions by creating groups. We do surveys, but we also do focused discussions in which we bring in representatives from such groups into the city offices, wherein they might share their views, and we might find an interesting way out of the issue that we are trying to address on ground. So this is one example of how we try and do this. But I think that's something that we have tried to focus on. And I just want to add that when we are talking about a group like young children, 0 to 5 years of age, what do they have to really say about infrastructure? We talk to caregivers and we try to understand from their perspective what they think and why they think, and what are the other possibilities that one might look at if we are trying to improve infrastructure for this group in the cities. So I think that might be my response for now. Thanks.
Great, thank you both. And we have two excellent questions from the audience. I'll just read them out. One is from Keely Swan, and she's saying Ashish mentioned having students from outside of India working on city level projects. And then this is the question for Angie as well. She's curious about the other side of the exchange. You know, when students in India could come and contribute to project design. That's a really, I mean, with both sides of ICLEI being in this panel, I haven't thought about it, but that could be really interesting. I want to open that up to both of you for thought. And then related to that, the comment is there's plenty to learn from one another, but also location-specific knowledge. So this way you get learning across cities. I just wanted to say I teach a class now on sustainable, healthy cities, and we're doing exactly that. My students know Rajkot because it's a case study city. So they're actually picking 3 cities in the US. Each of them is picking 1 city in the US, 1 in India, but doing this with a on-the-ground university in India would also be really fascinating to get that. I think it's another level of ambition to actually implement it. So why don't I open it up? And then the same person's question is, can you speak about how ICLEI balances local stakeholders' input with that of researchers?
Mm-hmm. Great.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, Keely, thanks for the question. That's a great idea. I had not actually thought of having university students from outside of the United States helping to form solutions and inform solutions in the US. I think that's a great idea. And I especially like that because I feel like in the US, our approach seems to be very engineering and technology focused. You know, let's put a solar panel on it, let's create some sort of infrastructure. Whereas I know my colleagues in South Asia and Africa are often working with cities where those technology solutions maybe are not available or accessible. And so they therefore have to be more innovative and creative in their approaches. And so I think there's certainly some things for us to think about there. So we'll have to come back to that, Ashish. Balancing the local stakeholder input and that of researchers, we do receive requests from researchers who want to connect with our cities and counties, and we're happy to do that. We also like to tag the cities for helping us to frame questions that we can put in front of researchers. A lot of that work is done through the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, which has an Innovate for Cities track and is doing quite a bit of research with cities that are participating in that global leadership campaign.
Great. Ashish, any thoughts from you on the same question? And then I'll move to the next question.
Yes, I think in short, I think Andy provided the response well, but I think there are similar examples of groups of students on an exchange platform visiting different contexts and learning from the context and then taking back that experience and probably developing on it in future. And that's definitely something that one can look at. There are limitations, but then there are also positives. So we can think about how we might take that further. Yeah. Sorry.
I was just going to follow up on that. In fact, we had done this in Delhi, where we had students from Indian universities, US universities, and Chinese schools, because we had an NSF grant looking at sustainable cities in the US, India, and China. And I think it was just logistically, Ashish remembers this. This was a huge thing. We had like 40 students overall, and we toured like 7 cities. And in a short span of time. But I think thinking through the scale, and maybe even as a Chadha Center now, this could be a great topic to explore, but maybe in a smaller way with a fewer number of students. But this is a great, Keely, thank you for this. It's a perfect idea to explore with ICLEI and the Chadha Center and the Keller Center as projects that, that might be engaging students in both countries, in cities in both countries. The other question is from Juju Lane, and she's saying, I'm sorry, they're saying, I'm a Princeton student and I would love to hear more about your work with circularity in manufacturing. Are you creating infrastructures within cities? And so this is the circular economy that Angie was talking about. And I might just say one quick thing is that our research grant is actually addressing circular economy in the context of deep decarbonization. So we have another project with ICLEI and the Twin Cities looking at circular economy. And we're also particularly interested in looking at crop residues in India, because they're contributing to air pollution. So this could be another really high impact project where this is much more India specific, but the burning of crops is resulting in air pollution. So that's an interesting one. I'll also open it to Ashish and Angie to talk about resource circularity. And then I'm going to combine the next two questions, but go ahead.
I'll defer to Ashish first, if you want to go first this time.
Oh, thank you, Angie. Yeah, no, I think I can say that from the circularity perspective, I think in the ongoing work that we have, this is definitely something that we think about, or we are looking at waste management in a big way in cities. And so this is focusing on plastic waste. This is focusing on waste that we can use to generate energy at a small scale, focusing on biomethanation and technologies such as that. And we are also looking at circularity from urban consumer perspective, looking at how goods are supplied in cities, and then the reverse cycle of how the waste that gets created adds to the issues in the city and how these things can be managed. So these are a variety of things that we are looking at right now. And we are hoping that this becomes something that's more ingrained in all of our initiatives. So for example, even when we talk about electric mobility, we now are mindful of the waste that gets created and how that gets handled at the local level, and discussions around that at the city level. This is, of course, a longer, larger discussion that is just getting started in our context. So I stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, great. So why don't I just quickly cover the other? We're probably just about at time, but I wanted to maybe just introduce the other two questions, and if we can just spend 5 more minutes. So one of them is from Aditya, and he's asking to develop a sustainable cities. Participation from the community is crucial. But in India, countries such as India, people are driven by economic and infrastructural growth. So how could you get people to opt for a sustainable option than a cheaper, unsustainable one? I think this is not just India, it happens everywhere. People are going for the cheaper, unsustainable option. And I'll also ask the second question, then you can answer together, both Ashish and Angie, and I'll take the last one on health. So Damu Radeshwar is asking, Ashish, is New Delhi considering electric vehicles for public transport? So if Ashish and Angie could address both questions. Why don't I begin with Ashish so you could address the Delhi question?
Sure. So in short, yes, there are plans to operate 1,000+ buses already for public transport. I think representative from the Delhi government spoke today at the UN panel talking about decarbonization of public transport, and they're taking it very seriously. Hopefully this will happen at a larger scale as we go further, but to begin with, we're looking at 1,000 buses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Angie, would you like to comment on how do you stop people from going for the cheaper, unsustainable option?
Right. Sure. This is all about communication, right, and helping people understand how their behavior impacts these broader city goals. There was a question about textiles in particular and circularity. I remember speaking with someone in the city of Fort Collins, Colorado, who was appalled to find out that all of the clothing that she had donated to a donation center, like a Goodwill, ended up in a landfill because it could not be resold. And here she thought she was doing the right thing by making this donation. And what she really needed to be doing was to think about the consumption behaviors on the front end.
Mm-hmm. Great. And also many strategies actually save money, but in the long term and not first cost. And so somehow thinking through how to support the first cost challenge is also so interesting. So I'll just address the last question from Shruti Khandelwal, and she's asking what types of health aspects have you looked at? So we actually look at all the sectors, so air pollution and health, so which touches upon cardiovascular disease, asthma, respiratory diseases. We've looked at waterborne diseases from poor sanitation. And these are models. We're actually developing an open modeling platform for every city to understand multiple health risks. And more recently, we're actually doing a project with both ICLEI South Asia and ICLEI USA on COVID and how are cities responding to COVID-related closures. So health covers all of the health effects as well as well-being, which is subjective well-being in our network. So physically, how people are impacted by infrastructure, but also how people think and feel, and psychologically about their well-being. So at this point, I think I should hand back to Jessica and see if there are closing thoughts from Jessica or Lillian on how you think, what does this stimulate from you from the Keller Center's perspective? And I'll hand off to you for closing down the session. And I want to personally thank all of the speakers, both from India, Ashish from India, Angie Fife from the US, and Keller Center, Jessica and Dana Boyer from the Sustainable Healthy Cities Network for your time on this panel. Thank you. So Jessica and Lillian, over to you.
Thank you, Anu, and also all the panelists. Again, this is a great discussion to explore the potential of some of these projects, maybe through like a design thinking lens, or approaching them using the human-centered sort of methodology. So we would also really like to hear from the students what they think might work and how this could become maybe some sort of like partnership. So if you guys in the audience, thank you for sticking with us. If you have any thoughts, please feel free. You guys are going to get a survey afterwards, so please feel free to share with us your thoughts on the potential of a Tiger Challenge in India, or any sort of like design thinking entrepreneurship that projects that stemmed from the discussion today. So thank you again to our panelists and to Anu for tying all this together for us. If there's no more questions, and I'm not sure if Lillian wants to say a few words, or
I just did want to express my thanks to everyone who submitted a question in the Q&A today. Obviously, tons of interest, lots of really thought-provoking questions. So thank you all who participated. And there you go.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. Particularly many thanks to the panelists, and huge thanks to Ashish for staying up late to join us. So thank you all, and we hope to get great responses from the students. Thanks everyone.